My sister stole my inheritance, but karma showed up at her doorstep. The judge stared my sister down, his eyes like chips of granite, and said the words that would detonate our lives. Sarah sat there, still wrapped in a cloak of smug confidence, but it was starting to fray at the edges. But before we get to the moment the verdict landed like a thunderclap in that silent room, you have to understand the depths of her betrayal. You have to understand how my own sister, the person trusted to execute our family's will, secretly and systematically drained every single cent of our inheritance. She didn't just steal money, she stole our parents' legacy. She laughed in my face and told me to get a job, believing her charade was foolproof. She really thought she'd gotten away with it. She had no idea I was about to bring the full weight of the law, and a whole lot of karma, crashing down on her front door. My parents were salt-of-the-earth people, the kind of quiet heroes who define a generation. They believed in hard work, quiet dignity, and saving for a rainy day that they prayed would never come. They weren't flashy people. I remember Dad beaming with pride over his 15-year-old sedan, boasting about how it still had another 100,000 miles in her. Mom packed their lunches for work every single day, turning leftovers into something special. Their big annual vacation was a week at a rented cabin on a lake 2 hours away, and to them, it might as well have been the French Riviera. They poured everything they had, every saved dollar, every ounce of energy into giving me and my older sister Sarah a life with more opportunities than they ever had. And they succeeded. They left us a paid-for family home, a place filled with memories and what felt like a small fortune in savings, the tangible result of a lifetime of sacrifice. When they passed away within a year of each other, the grief was a physical force, a suffocating fog that made it hard to breathe. But even in that fog, life demands that things be handled. Our parents' will was simple and clear, just like them. Everything was to be split 50-50 between their two girls. Sarah, being the older and by all appearances the more responsible one, was named the executor. At the time it made perfect sense. I was drowning in sorrow and she seemed so capable, so clear-headed. I trusted her completely. She was my big sister, the one who taught me how to ride a bike and checked for monsters under my bed. An executor, I knew, had what's called a fiduciary duty. It's a legal obligation to act in the best interests of the estate and its beneficiaries. You have to put your own interests aside and be completely loyal and transparent. I had no reason on earth to think she'd do anything else. She promised to handle everything, to make it all go smoothly so we could grieve without the added stress of banks and lawyers. "Don't you worry about a thing," she told me, patting my hand at Mom's funeral, her expression a perfect mask of sincere compassion. "I'll take care of it all. It's the last thing I can do for them. It's what Mom and Dad would have wanted." And I believed her. But I believed every word. That was my first and most devastating mistake. For the first few months, my life was a blur of just trying to get through the day. Every time I managed to gather the emotional energy to ask Sarah for an update, I was met with a new, plausible-sounding excuse. It was always probate delays and legal red tape. "The courts are just so backed up since the pandemic," she'd sigh dramatically over the phone. "And the paperwork is a complete nightmare. You wouldn't believe it." I tried to be patient. I was grieving. I didn't have the capacity for bureaucracy and I was grateful she was handling it. But then, the curated reality of social media began to tell a different story. I started seeing pictures online. Sarah, who had always complained about being perpetually broke and living paycheck to paycheck, was suddenly living a life of unbelievable luxury. One post showed a brand new top-of-the-line luxury SUV in her driveway, complete with a giant red bow. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. #blessed." Then came the photos from a spontaneous, much-needed trip to Europe. Not a budget backpacking trip, but 5-star hotels in Paris, shopping bags from designer boutiques lining the floor of her suite, and champagne toasts on the Amalfi Coast. When I called to ask her about it, my voice trembling with a confusion I didn't want to acknowledge, she got defensive instantly. "I have my own savings, you know," she snapped, her tone icy. "I'm allowed to have a life. Not everything is about the inheritance." It was like a switch flipped. The warm, compassionate sister was gone, replaced by a cold, dismissive stranger. That was a massive red flag, but the real alarm bell, the one that shattered my denial, was a call from a local realtor. He was polite, professional. "I'm calling about the property on Elm Street," he said. "Is it still available for a showing?" I was utterly confused and told him it wasn't on the market. There was a pause. "That's strange," he said, his voice hesitant. "Your sister, Sarah, just accepted a cash offer on it yesterday. We were hoping to present a backup offer." My blood ran cold. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. He was selling our parents' home, our childhood home, behind my back. That night I drove to her house, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I demanded answers. I wanted to see everything, The estate accounting, the bank statements, the sale agreement for the house, all of it. We had a monumental fight. She screamed that I was ungrateful and suspicious, that she was doing all the hard work while I just sat around. I screamed back that she was lying to my face. A week later, defeated and seething, she finally shoved a folder at me. "Here," she spat. "Happy now?" The numbers inside were pure fiction. The documents were a flimsy attempt at accounting, claiming that after paying off mountains of imaginary hidden debts and wildly inflated executor fees, the estate was basically worthless. I just stared at the papers, my hands shaking so violently I could barely read the words. This wasn't a delay, this was calculated, methodical theft. My sister had used her position of trust, a sacred trust placed in her by our parents, to drain our family's life savings and funnel it into her own pockets. It has a legal name: embezzlement and a breach of fiduciary duty. She had moved money from the estate account to her personal accounts and cooked the books to cover her tracks. She watched me, a cruel, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Looks like there's nothing left," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Guess you'll have to get a job after all." I left her house that night feeling like a ghost. The world was moving around me, but I was hollowed out, completely broken. It wasn't just about the money. The money was a symbol of our parents' love and hard work, but the real wound was the betrayal. The one person on the planet who should have had my back, who shared my blood and my grief, was using our parents' death as her own personal lottery ticket. For weeks I was paralyzed by despair and indecision. How could I sue my own sister? It felt like taking a sledgehammer to the last fragile remnants of our family. I finally hit rock bottom and broke down, telling my best friend everything. I sobbed through the whole ugly story in his kitchen. He just listened patiently, making me a cup of tea. When I was done, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You cannot let her get away with this. This isn't just about you anymore. She is spitting on your parents' memory. What would they say if they could see this?" That was the spark I needed. He was right. This wasn't for me, this was for my mom and dad. My grief and helplessness hardened into a cold, clear resolve. The very next day I started researching probate litigation attorneys. I walked into a lawyer's office a few days later with a box of Sarah's fake documents and a heart heavy as lead. He was an older gentleman, calm and methodical. He listened to the entire story without interruption, occasionally making a note. He looked over the fraudulent papers Sarah had given me and nodded slowly. "This is called inheritance theft," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And it is a serious crime. An executor who steals from an estate, who breaches their fiduciary duty, can be removed by the court, forced to repay every single dollar, and in some cases even face felony charges." For the first time in months I felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope. He warned me it would be a long, emotionally draining road, a fight she would likely make ugly. But he said we had an incredibly strong case. When I left his office that afternoon, the suffocating despair had finally transformed into grim determination. I was done being a victim. I was going to fight back. The first official move was my attorney sending Sarah a formal demand letter. It was a serious, no-nonsense document that laid out our accusations in clear terms: breach of fiduciary duty, suspected embezzlement and fraudulent accounting. It demanded a full, transparent accounting of the entire estate and the immediate return of all stolen assets. We gave her 30 days to comply. Unsurprisingly, she ignored it completely. I later heard through the grapevine that she'd laughed it off, telling a mutual friend I was throwing a tantrum and hiring a cheap lawyer to scare her. She was cocky, arrogant, and truly believed she was untouchable. Her arrogance was her undoing. We moved on to phase 2, filing a formal petition in probate court. We asked the judge to remove her as executor and legally compel her to produce every single financial document related to her and to our parents' estate. This is where her carefully constructed world of lies began to completely unravel. The court granted our petition, giving us the power of discovery. This meant we could issue subpoenas to her banks, her credit card companies, and even the dealership where she bought her SUV and the title company that handled her new house purchase. We were about to get a look behind the curtain, and what we found was staggering. It wasn't just a smoking gun, it was a smoking arsenal. It was a step-by-step, day-by-day roadmap of her greed. We laid the documents out on my attorney's huge conference table. First, we saw the massive transfer from our parents' estate account, a single transaction for over half the total savings, into a newly opened personal savings account in her name only. We saw her use estate funds for the down payment on her new house. We saw the wire transfer to the luxury car dealership for her SUV, sent just 2 days after she sold our parents' home. It was just line item after line item of extravagant, brazen spending: designer clothes, $5,000 handbags, lavish dinners and first-class flights, all paid for with the money our parents had worked their entire lives to save for our future. She hadn't even been smart about it, making personal luxury purchases on the same day she made huge withdrawals from the estate. The evidence was undeniable, irrefutable, and absolutely sickening. My lawyer patiently built our case, piece by irrefutable piece, creating a timeline that was impossible to deny. The day of the court hearing, I felt sick to my stomach. My own sister, the girl I grew up with, was about to sit across a courtroom from me and lie under oath, all to protect the money she had stolen from our family. Before I tell you what happened when the judge finally laid down the law, I want to know, what would you have done? Would you have fought back like I did even if it meant destroying your family? Or would you have let it go to try and keep the peace? Let me know what you think in the comments. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and intimidating. Sarah sat at the opposing table with her lawyer, looking confident, almost bored, as if this was all just a ridiculous annoyance. She stuck to her story with infuriating calm, that the expenses were legitimate, that the estate had undisclosed debts, and that I was nothing more than a bitter, jealous sister looking for a handout. Her confidence began to visibly crumble when my lawyer began his presentation. He didn't just show numbers on a spreadsheet, he told the story of her betrayal. He used a projector displaying the estate's bank statements on a large screen for the entire court to see. He highlighted the massive withdrawals and then, right next to them, displayed Sarah's personal credit card statements showing luxury purchases made on the exact same day. He put up the deed to her new house, showing the purchase date was just 1 week after the funds were transferred out of the estate account. The final brutal blow was when he displayed her own social media photos. The trip to Paris, the shopping sprees, the new SUV, each one time-stamped to perfectly align with a huge cash withdrawal. Sarah's face went from pale to ashen. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of pure panic. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the judge, my hands gripping the podium. I didn't just talk about the money. I talked about our parents, about how they trusted her, how they believed in her. I told the judge how she had laughed in my face when she told me the money was all gone. My voice cracked with emotion, but I pushed through the tears. I needed him to understand the depth of the betrayal, that this was a moral crime, not just a financial one. Finally, the judge spoke. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking from the mountain of evidence to my sister. The bored look was long gone, replaced by a stare of utter contempt. His voice was low and dripping with disdain as he spoke about the sacred and solemn duty of an executor, a fiduciary duty that he called one of the highest trusts in civil law. He said that she hadn't just failed that duty, she had shamelessly and maliciously defiled her parents' memory for personal greed. Then came the verdict. It was the karma I had prayed for, delivered with the full force of the law. First, she was immediately removed as executor of the estate. Second, she was ordered to repay every single dollar she had stolen with interest. But it didn't stop there. The judge, citing the malicious, intentional, and fraudulent nature of her actions, hit her with massive punitive damages. He explained that punitive damages are not meant to compensate me, but to punish her for conduct so outrageous it deserved to be penalized, and to deter others from ever doing something similar. The judgment was so high that it completely wiped out her entire half of the inheritance and then some. She wouldn't get a single cent of our parents' money. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been delivered with a hammer. Section 6. The aftermath. The fallout for Sarah was swift and total. The court's judgment was an ironclad debt she couldn't escape. To satisfy it, she was forced to sell the new house she had so proudly flaunted. The luxury SUV was repossessed. I imagine the designer clothes and handbags were sold for pennies on the dollar to consignment shops. In a matter of months, she was left with absolutely nothing but a mountain of her own legal debt and a court-ordered repayment plan that would follow her for years. Her reputation was ruined. Any family friends who had been on the fence, unsure of who to believe, quickly learned the truth from the public court record. Our relationship, of course, was completely and irrevocably destroyed. We haven't spoken a single word since that day in court, and I doubt we ever will. There was no joy or triumphant celebration in watching my sister's life implode. There was just a quiet, profound, and heavy sense of justice. The court appointed a new, impartial executor to handle the recovered assets. It took another long year of liquidating her assets and untangling the mess she'd made, but I finally received my rightful inheritance. The full half our parents had wanted me to have, the portion Sarah had tried so desperately to steal. With the money, I was able to put a down payment on a small house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place my mom would have loved, with a backyard perfect for a garden. I planted roses in her memory. But the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the peace that came from knowing I honored my parents and fought for their legacy. It was the strength I found in myself, a strength I never knew I possessed, to stand up against a sickening betrayal and fight for what was right. My sister thought she was just stealing money, but what she really taught me was how resilient I am. She slammed a door in my face, but karma showed up at hers and knocked it right off the hinges. Thank you for listening to my story. It was the most painful journey of my life, but it ended with truth and justice being served. If you've ever been in a situation with family, at work, anywhere, that made you feel powerless, I hope hearing this reminds you of your own strength and your right to fight back. If you found this story of justice satisfying, please hit that like button, and consider subscribing for more true stories. Thanks for being here. And thanks for watching.